Hello, and welcome to XP. So I'm Simon Brown, and I'm going to be talking about the frustrated architect. So this is really about architecture within an agile environment and architecture within a modern software environment as well. So who am I, where do I come from? I come from down here, a tiny, tiny island called Jersey. South of England, north of France. I can see France from my house. Why am I here? I was born there, used to work in London and moved back about 4 years ago. What do I do? I'm a software developer. When I worked in London, mostly did Java development. When I moved back to Jersey, it was all .NET. So I've cross-trained into the Microsoft stack, and I've kind of come back again, which is fun. I also do training, consulting, that sort of thing. And I have a book about software architecture, which is being published on LeanPub. And it's really about a lightweight, lean, pragmatic approach to modern software architecture. So what are we going to talk about? This is a presentation of two halves. There's a good half, and there's a slightly bad half. And the bad half is coming first. And I don't mean bad as in it's going to be bad, I mean it's going to be frustrated. So we have to get through the frustration, and then we can get to the serenity bit and see how we can fix all these problems. So, perceptions. Can we just turn this down a tiny bit? Is that possible? Just getting lots of... Is it possible to turn the volume down? It's okay? Yep. It's just very loud here, that's all. I should stand at the back. So, when we talk about software architecture, there's lots of negative perceptions about the role. So if I were to introduce myself as a software architect, people usually go, oh, you're one of these people who doesn't write code. You do UML, you write big documents, you do waterfalls, you do analysis paralysis and all this bad thing. And ivory towers, brilliant, thank you. And, you know, there's a really, really bad negative association with this word, software architect, in a modern day software development environment. Why? We've got PowerPoint architects, you know, people who draw big PowerPoint diagrams, enterprise service bus, and this is the architecture. That doesn't really work in reality, does it? I went to a meeting in London once, and they described architects as this: business, technology, strategists. I know what these three words mean on their own. I don't know what these three words mean in this particular order. Does this make any sense to anybody? Doesn't make sense to me, I speak English. They also said this in the same meeting: Microsoft SharePoint has a solid ROI and TCO. Two things, I'm not sure this statement is true. Second thing is buzzwords. We're always talking in buzzwords here. And some poor guy at the back of the room was asking for advice about how to get MongoDB into his environment. And the guy running the meeting said, what's your business case? Create me a business case for getting MongoDB into your project. And he was like, oh, I just want to do a proof of concept, please. So there's lots of buzzwords associated with the role as well. And some of these buzzwords are useful if you're talking to, you know, executives and managers, but a lot of the time they're just unnecessary. And I think the buzzwords put people off getting into the software architecture discipline. So a lot of those words, business, technology, strategists, they just don't make sense to us as software developers. So, we're at XP conference. Let's talk about Agile. Who's Agile here? And the rest of you aspiring to be Agile? Yes, go on, you can admit it. So there's lots of Agile stuff going on at the moment, which is brilliant, because it's really changing the way that we work. And there are lots of organizations now who they're trying to be Agile. They're aspiring to be Agile. They're starting to adopt Agile processes, even though it's been going for like 10, 11, 12 years. And this is cool, but we are forgetting things. You know, we're forgetting a lot of what we've done in the past that has actually worked. So when we start a new project now, we have a whole bunch of things we can possibly do. You know, we have a whole bunch of XP practices and Agile practices and approaches, and those are cool. So we should focus on those things. You know, continuous delivery, continuous integration, and automated testing. But what about the other things that we used to do? They're boring. I see a lot of this. I see a lot of disciplines and techniques with Agile prefixed in front of them. Agile something. Agile architecture. What does this mean? I don't actually position a lot of my content that I write about on my website as being agile, but a lot of people have picked it up because it's just a nice, pragmatic, lightweight approach to software architecture. So what is an agile software architect? Yeah, I don't know, but it sounds cool! Because I can talk about, well, I don't need to talk about UML and waterfalls, I can talk about Yagni and last responsible moment, and all these cool buzzwords that we've got. So if I introduce myself as an agile architect, this is so much better. Maybe this is agile architecture. Because we use post-it notes for everything. I actually teach people how to draw pictures sometimes using post-it notes. So maybe this is why people think I'm an agile architect. Cool! This is your typical agile picture. You know, agile processes broken up into sprints and time boxes. Yeah, it's just all swooshed. We're doing all of these things on the left all the time. We're delivering value early, we're getting feedback, we're moving fast, we're embracing change, etc., etc. Where does architecture fit into this? Well, it either fits here as a sprint 0, but the Scrum guys, they say, if you're doing sprint 0, you're not doing Scrum, you're doing something different. What? So the other approach is the whole evolutionary architecture, emergent design approach. Unfortunately, a lot of people think it means this, hoping for the best. I see a lot of teams now who are agile, and they're doing architecture, which really means they're just hacking, because they're doing neither very well. As a side point, these are the same teams who never did things properly anyway. But now they're blaming it on Agile. People don't often talk about Agile and architecture in the same sentence, do they? There seems to be a conflict between these two concepts. But there isn't. Agile projects need architecture. So where is the conflict? The conflict is first of all in the process. You know, Agile is about delivering value early, getting feedback. Whereas big upfront design, which is what we normally refer to when we talk about architecture, is about understanding everything. So it's really about the approach, and there's a conflict between the approach that we're trying to follow here. What does this lead to? This line in the Agile Manifesto says that they value responding to change over following a plan. A lot of people interpret this to mean, let's not do any planning. You still need to know where you're going. You still need to have some sort of high-level vision. But people don't seem to understand that these days for some reason. I worked on a project a while ago in London, and we did UML diagrams for about 6 months. That's all we did. We did not write a single line of code, we just did UML diagrams. We did lots of business modeling and analysis and all that cool stuff, and actually it was quite fun because it was a really interesting business domain. What value did these diagrams add at the end of the day? Some value, but there was no code, there's nothing to execute, nothing that customers could touch, feel, get feedback on. So of course, this is analysis paralysis, and we know this is bad, so we don't do it anymore. We have other approaches to business analysis and modeling and things. But a lot of modern teams are afraid of doing any analysis. And I do mean any analysis whatsoever. And this is kind of scary. You know, when I'm starting a brand new software project, I need to answer 3 or 4 really, really important key questions. You know, who's using this thing? What types of users and roles and personas do we have here? What are my major key system dependencies? You know, where are we getting data from? Where are we sending data to? Because this is all big, important stuff. And what are the key constraints we're working within? You know, most of us don't have the luxury of a completely clean slate. We have existing systems, constraints, technologies, teams, money, etc. But some teams don't even understand these basic questions anymore. So we've moved away from doing big design up front. But what's it been replaced with? Nothing. And I do mean nothing. No design up front. So now people are fumbling around in the dark. and just hoping that they're going to get to some solution eventually that makes sense. I've also heard teams say this. I've heard teams say that we don't need architecture because we do test-driven development. Oh my goodness, really? TDD is great, it works for some people, it doesn't work for others. But you still need boundaries within which to do TDD. You need to decide important stuff, make significant decisions. So TDD is about code predominantly, yes, it's about design and all those other things. But software architecture is about stepping back and seeing the bigger picture too. So you need both of these things in tandem. Who said this? Last responsible moment. I hate this term with a passion, because this is one of the most abused terms in Agile I've come across. The underlying principle here is fantastic. You know, if you can defer a decision, defer it. Unfortunately, people miss that point. And then what happens? They just foolishly hope for the best. You know, they're not doing any planning, any thinking whatsoever. A lot of teams know what they're building, they know how they're going to build it. So just make some decisions early. You know, stop putting off those framework decisions, just make them. If you follow Uncle Bob's, you know, clean architecture, you can change those things anyway. Okay, there's a cost, but you can still change stuff. So coming back to the conflict between Agile and architecture, there's also the conflict in team structure. You know, traditionally we like doing this, we have a dedicated architect. Sometimes they're the ivory tower architect, I grant you. Sometimes they're not. But with our Agile teams, we're here now, we're self-organising. Who's the self-organising team here? Right, exactly, a very, very small number. Who's tried it? A few more people. It's really, really hard to do in the real world. So you often hear Agile teams saying, we don't need those stinking architects, we can do it ourselves. Thank you. We're all multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, cross-functional, we can do everything, we're great. So yeah, Agile teams are small teams with cross-discipline team members, with a view to doing everything. And why not? It's a brilliant, brilliant idea. But it doesn't work in the real world a lot of the time, because things tend to fall between the gaps. You know, particularly the big, significant decisions around performance or scaling or security or availability and so on. So the whole flat self-organising teams thing is great, and there are some brilliant examples out there on the web of where it really does work, but those teams tend to be very, very senior, and they know exactly what they're doing. For the rest of us, sometimes this does not work. So we need to get away with this fascination of striving to be these self-organising teams when we're not there yet, we're not ready for it. So why am I bashing Agile at an Agile conference? This seems a very foolish thing to do, I agree. I'm not. I like Agile, I like what it stands for, I like its approaches, I like what it's done to our industry, mostly. But there are a lot of people out there who just don't think, they're just adopting all this new, shiny, cool stuff because it's all shiny, new and cool. And then when it doesn't work, oh, Agile's rubbish. Let's move on to something else, let's do lean now. Oh. So I'm just bashing teams that don't think. And we seem to have forgotten how to think in some cases. Particularly with respect to, I think, software architecture. So let's have a retrospective. That's a good Agile word, isn't it? One of the things I've seen happen is that Agile teams tend to like reinventing stuff. Again, and again, and again. And this is somewhat sad and somewhat tragic. Because, yeah, I think we've forgotten a lot in our industry. Our industry is relatively young, but we don't have a history. Except we do have a history, but nobody knows about it. So, show of hands. Who here uses UML on a regular basis? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8. That's a tiny, tiny percentage. What's everybody else doing? Agile! So, you know, UML's massively fallen out of fashion. But there's some really, really good stuff in there. You know, you can use some UML diagrams to describe stuff very, very easily. You know, activity diagrams, representing flows. There's a whole ton of really good stuff in there. But people don't use it, and some people don't know it even exists. There was this, look at this book down here, look, CD-ROM included. This is how old this book is. And it was about taking UML and adding an extra level of information on top of it in colours. So different colours refer to different types of classes. Again, really nice technique that nobody knows about. Now, I'm not saying we should go learn UML this afternoon and go read this book, but there's some nice ideas here that we can bring forward into our 21st century Agile world. Here's another really great technique that people don't know about. It's called CRC, Class, Responsibility, Collaboration. Who's done this? Again, a really small number of people. This is a brilliant workshopping technique. It was very popular in the sort of 90s and early 2000s when use cases were the way to write down and capture requirements. It's a workshopping technique. You get a bunch of people around in a room around a use case, and you start doing class level design. You start looking at how you're going to satisfy each line in the use case with a bunch of classes collaborating. So you write each class name on a 6x4 index card, and then you start looking at its responsibilities, and you start identifying the collaborations between classes. It's great. It's collaborative. Agile teams like collaboration, but we don't do this. Why? Because we don't do class level design anymore. Why? Because we do TDD instead. But we can still use this technique at a high level of abstraction. We can do component responsibility collaboration to come up with high level software architectures, and then do your TDD within inside those boundaries. So there's really interesting stuff we can pull forward from the past here. If anyone's looked at Uncle Bob Martin's clean code and clean architecture stuff, he talks about this, which is Ivar Jakobsen's boundaries, controllers, entities, which is a really, really nice, simple way of structuring applications. Nobody's heard of this. Again, when people were using rational unified process and use cases, there was a really nice set of steps which you go through to end up with something that looks like this. Great way to partition your applications. Related to that, component-based development, list of substitution, which is thankfully now coming back into fashion again. People are hearing about it. Low coupling, loose coupling, high cohesion. These are all great techniques that we need to teach people about. POSA, pattern-oriented software architecture. There's some really classic books out there with some fantastic patterns in, but people don't read these things anymore. Why? Because we're reading Agile books instead. I was talking to some people at a conference last year, and they were talking about some crazy cool Erlang system they were building. And they were describing these patterns that they were using. And I was sitting next to one of the authors of this book, and he said, yeah, that's in the book we wrote 20 years ago. Awesome. Nothing's changed. Rational unified process. Again, it's another way to approach the software development lifecycle. I'm not saying we should go learn RAP and adopt it, because it usually fails. But there's some really nice stuff in here. Teams come to me and say, Simon, we're doing Agile, and we don't know how to manage risks. Right, this problem's been solved before. Go look at RUP, it tells you how to manage potential risks. So my advice here is, there's a lot of old stuff out there which is very useful today. And you need to just be pragmatic with it. But here's the thing. If you don't know it exists, how can you be pragmatic about it? So how many training courses are there at the XP Days conference about Rational Unified Process or UML? None. Why? Because it's not cool. So who's teaching all the old stuff? The classics of the pre-Agile era? The answer is basically nobody, because it's not cool. So we have all these old books on our bookshelves gathering dust, and there's some really great stuff in there, which I think is a shame. So, you think you're an architect, huh? I used to hire architects in London when I worked for a consulting company. And their CVs used to come through to us, and they would say, I'm an enterprise architect. and they would describe their role and their job, and basically they would just do some coding, doing some software architecture on a large enterprise project. It's not really the same thing, you know, they're misusing the term here somewhat, whatever. I can do that. It's a bit annoying, but whatever. It turns out when you drill into these people's experience, they're not doing software architecture either, they're doing something else. And they're doing this, and I really do not like this. You have a solution architect. They go talk to people, they look at a problem. They craft a solution. They document the solution in a big document. And then they hand it to the development team. And then run away, very fast. Never ever to be seen again. What do they do next? They go do the same thing on another project. Now, even if this was the world's best architecture, how do these guys ask this guy questions about it? All the knowledge, context, experience disappeared. So in essence, they're using this document as a baton in a relay race. This guy does the first 200 meters, these guys do the remaining 40 kilometers or something ridiculous. I interviewed a guy who did this, and I asked him a very simple question. I said, how do you know that your architecture is going to work? You know, your solution, is it going to work? He looked very confused. Why am I asking this funny question? Yeah, I was like, what? So I asked him again and again and again, and finally he gave me an answer. And his answer was, I don't. And it's not my problem. Dude, not get a job. He then said, it's an implementation detail. Oh my goodness. So this guy, he was an ass. And I did not hire him. What I mean by ass, I mean architecture as a service. That's all he was doing. This is not the way to do architecture. This is something different, so we need to stop doing this. This person needs to be here, or these people need to be here. I don't care which it is. So the whole software architecture thing is not an implementation detail. You know, if you're designing an architecture, you need to make sure it works. Why? Because bad stuff happens if you don't. So, you know, I've seen projects in the past where people have rolled out live projects onto the internet. There have been security problems. You know, sessions that don't time out. You can do cross-site scripting on the public internet. Stuff doesn't work. You know, 404 pages, ASP.NET error pages, whatever, stack traces when you visit pages. People roll systems out with no penetration testing when they really should, no load testing when they really should. Consulting companies and outsourced providers that have no documentation for their systems. There's just a whole bunch of mess that happened. You know, people are building systems that don't work a lot of the time. I saw this happen recently on a project in Jersey. And this is kind of tragic. Particularly when I tell you that, you know, I've seen this stuff happen for a strategic platform. You know, phase one is to build a nice, secure, robust platform. And it looks like this. This is exactly the stuff that the architecture role needs to be looking after. We talked about documentation on my training course yesterday, and I've got to talk about documentation later. I think, you know, all software projects should produce some documentation, because there's so much additional knowledge and context that gets lost otherwise. And I'm not saying that we should all become authors, but, you know, we should have some level of documentation sitting across the top of our code base. But it needs to be lean and lightweight. You know, not this 200-page monster. So you think I'm an architect? Can't afford you. I'm not. I'm joking. When I worked in London at consulting companies, I really had to fight with my management to let me continue coding on projects. They just didn't get it. You know, particularly, I worked for a small company, of about 100 people, and we got bought by a really big consulting company, and all of our salaries and grades got cross-mapped into this big consulting company, and my job title ended up being executive manager. I'm like, what? And they're saying, why is one of our executive managers trying to do coding on this small software project? They just didn't get it. And I had to really fight to keep that kind of liberty. I've had this as well, and I've had this in the last few weeks. You know, I've gone into an organisation and they said, right, what we want you to do is we want you to look at our requirements and then come up with technology agnostic architecture and some estimates, please. Right. You realise if I put you together an architect for starters, and what's the value in doing something that's agnostic to technologies? Don't we know which products we want to take advantage of, which features we want to take advantage of with different platforms? So you've got this whole conflict between architects who know about technology and who want to code, and you know, those who don't, the ivory tower architects. So good. On Twitter, there's this guy, Jason Gorman in the UK, and he talks about the software craftsmanship with him. And he was quoting this once: "I don't write code anymore, that's how good I am at programming." Referring to how we seem to hire quite senior people who don't want to code or can't code, and put them in charge of the technical stuff on our projects. So when I was trying to hire architects in London, I was always looking for people with, you know, deep hands-on technology experience. I was doing some research because I actually ran this talk a few weeks ago in London, and I stumbled across this phrase which I've never heard before, and it's just hilarious. Post-technical. A lot of people think that software architecture is a post-technical career, it's something you do after you've been technical. So I did some digging around on this particular title, and I found a blog entry by a guy who works for ThoughtWorks. And apparently this is some like major insult at ThoughtWorks. To quote the blog entry, in ThoughtWorks, one of the most poignant insults one can throw at you is so-and-so has gone post-technical. Wow. Do people see this? Is this just a UK thing, or is there a perception that architects don't do technical stuff anymore? It depends, yeah. It depends on organisation a lot. Certainly the bigger organisations tend to have this approach. Why does this happen? It happens because, we start our careers as developers, we do lots of work, we move to senior developer, we do lots of work. We move up the ranks. We get more senior, we get more experience, we get paid more. And eventually, to get another pay rise, you have to make a choice. You either don't, or you go post-technical and non-technical and move into some other path, some management path, for example. And I know a lot of people have had to make that decision. I can't fix that. That's a really hard thing to fix in a lot of organisations. But there's an interesting side effect that we can fix, and we do have control over. And the problem here is that a lot of organisations are losing their best technical mentors because these people are moving away from the technical side of things. Why does this happen? Lots and lots of reasons, but money and ego are definitely in that list somewhere. And a lot of people use the term software architect as a rank in an organisation. So you get promoted to be a software architect, and that's the title on your business card. I like to talk about software architecture as a role, though, not as a rank. And it's a role that you need to evolve into. So if I look at my own career, this is a funny pseudograph of coding versus architecture, because they are mutually exclusive, of course. Over time I started off doing lots and lots and lots of coding, taking instruction from other people on the team. But eventually you kind of move through the ranks and you get more experience and you start designing bigger chunks of the system. And eventually, you're doing lots of architecture. At this point in my career, I was doing lots of UML diagrams, that was it. And then I realised, this is bad. I need to go back and do some coding, so I went back to kind of mix up the role a bit more. But yeah, it's a role that you evolve into. And people ask me now, would you be happy going back into a team as a software developer and not doing any architecture? Yes. but there are some people out there that that's just not acceptable. So, a challenge for you. Next time you've got some spare time on the internet, go to LinkedIn or Stack Overflow and you'll find questions like this. Hi, I've just been promoted to be a software architect. What do I do? Great. What do you mean by promoted? Sorry?
There's no answers to this question in the internet.
There's no answers to this question in the
Because
internet.
I look for this.
So, what's interesting about this picture? Well, first of all, this is LinkedIn, so it's public. And look, I've had to blur the face out, just in case I embarrass somebody in the future. Why would you do this on the internet? The other big issue I have with teams, and particularly agile teams sometimes, is that they don't often know what it is they're building. What do I mean by this? You know, I've walked into teams to do consulting, and they've not been able to answer two simple questions. What is it you're building, and how are you going to build it? At a very, very high level, teams often can't answer these basic questions. And it turns out that teams are just in chaos. They're just doing random stuff. You know, churning, not actually getting to their goal. And we need to stop that. Because chaotic teams tend to build systems that don't work. You know, they're insecure, they're not fast enough, they don't scale properly, they're not available when they should be. Or they're just big balls of mud. Has anybody seen big balls of mud?
Yeah.
Who's working on big balls of mud? Come on! So there's a whole ton of bad stuff out there, and it comes from chaos. So how do we fix chaos? How do we inject structure and leadership and vision back into software projects? Well, it's easy. What we do is we get a solution architect, right, and they look at the solution, and they document the solution in lots of detail. And then what they do with the solution is they give it to the development team, and they run away. No! That's a different thing altogether, remember? But we've tried that in the past, it fails. What happens if you get a big document to read? Yeah, later you don't read it. So if you're trying to create a shared vision through a big document and nobody's reading it, there's no vision and you're still in chaos. So the shared understanding that's being created there is really this. Too long, didn't read. Therefore results in chaos. But we're on Agile now. Right? So we don't do this. No, we do something different. Now, we don't write big documents. We don't use UML. What do we do? Something. What we do is we get a whiteboard or a piece of paper and we draw some pictures. Or we use the system metaphor or something like that. And what's the shared vision we create there? Well, to use another internet term, and I'll let you look this up if you don't know what it means, it's this. Yes. So again, we're creating a shared vision that nobody really understands, which leads to chaos. So, I don't think people can draw pictures anymore. In fact, one of the reasons I do training is to teach people how to draw pictures. Now, I'm not talking in the arty sense, because I'm not an artist, but what I mean is, can you communicate what it is you're building in a simple and effective way? I'm going to show you a real picture, which I've anonymized, of a project I came across in Jersey. See if you can understand what this project is. Ready? I hope you're sitting down for this. Oh, it's partly zero. It's actually a big Microsoft SharePoint system. But this diagram is just boxes and layers, and there's no lines and no interactions, and we can't see the big picture, and there are no users on here. It's just a mess. Now, why are these yellow? I have no idea what's going on here. So, why do people draw pictures like this? Well, it's because we don't teach them how to draw pictures anymore. So where do people go to get their education these days? If you guys have a problem, where do you go? Google, yes! Let's ask Google about software architecture diagram, shall we? Here we go, page 1. Right, they're all the same. Not sure I like any of those, let's go to page 2. Ah, they're all the same. Page 3, they're all the same as well. It's a UML. I hope you don't know UML because, well, you don't understand it, so we look at all those. We should filter out UML diagrams in this search. Page 4, oh, look at that one. That looks like an auto-generated class diagram. But look, same sorts of things again, you know, boxes, colours, layers. Next page, it's the same again. Look, more pictures up here. Page 6, anybody getting bored yet? Are you feeling inspired about how to draw pictures yet from Google? I'm not. Look, page 7, another one, look. It's the same picture. So this is where people are getting their inspiration from. So it's no wonder that they can't draw pictures. Who's using Kanban here? Story walls, that kind of thing. You know, visualizing your process, index cards, post-it notes on walls, virtual, physical, electronic, whatever. Yeah. And it's great. So you take a big chunk of wall, you have your backlog of things you need to do, tasks or user stories, whatever. And you know, over here on the left, in your first column, that's stuff to do. In the middle is stuff that's in progress, and over here is stuff that's done. And we have lots of ways to move these cards around, and we can have like swim lanes within swim lanes, and there are lots of ways to optimize that process, to put work in process limits and things like that on Kanban boards. And we've got really, really good at visualizing that stuff, which is great, because it gives us transparency over our processes, which we never had in Microsoft Project. So we're good at visualizing certain aspects of our project, but not the things we're building, which is crazy. So here's my challenge to you. This is an actual challenge rather than a fake LinkedIn challenge. Next time you have some spare time at work, maybe a lunch hour, set your team a challenge. Ask them whether they can draw some pictures of your current software systems and visualize the software that you're building. And I don't just mean draw a big picture which says your system name and that's it. I mean, you know, something that actually makes sense, that you can show to people who aren't on the team, that can understand, you know, your code base and how your system works. This is really, really hard to do now. So that's the frustrated half. It's actually more than half. You've only got 10 minutes. You're okay. So how do we fix all these problems? You know, how do we re-inject structure and technical leadership and vision back into 21st century software projects? I have to say, regardless of whether you're doing Agile or not, you know, these things are applicable on all types of projects. So my number one tip here is basically get an architect on the project. What do I mean by an architect? I mean a master builder. If you trace the word architect back to its Greek and Latin root, it means chief builder, chief carpenter, master builder. So in other words, somebody who knows about the technologies that they're dealing with, that they're using. Somebody who's able to put these things together and compose them in a way that makes sense to satisfy the goals and the requirements. You know, every team should have one or more master builders to look after the technical leadership stuff. This is how we do the self-organizing team thing. You know, we split the role amongst many people. That can work fine. And really, it's not about focusing on big upfront design. It's about focusing on what's important. So, you know, on a typical project, what's important? It's about understanding how everything fits together at a high level. You know, your technologies and your components and your subsystems. Not your database tables and classes and all that kind of stuff, just the high-level elements. And if you've got complex non-functionals, make sure you know how that stuff works. Do you need to do class diagrams for every single user story? No. We've got other ways to do that kind of stuff. I've seen teams document database schemas and before they created the schema, document how long every column should be. Why are you doing this? We can change that stuff. We've got refactoring tools. I think I'm fairly certain to say that most software projects have non-functional requirements of some description. You know, particularly if you're putting stuff on the internet, security is going to be crucially important for you. And there are typically constraints in the environment. You know, target deployment platforms, existing systems, integration points, team sizes, money, so on. Before you put pen to paper, before you start sketching up solutions and architectures, You need to make sure you understand this type of stuff, the big picture items. There's a guy called Scott Ambler, and if you've not heard of him, I definitely recommend going to look up his name. He's got 2 websites of interest. The first one's called agilemodeling.com, and the second one is called disciplinedagiledelivery.com. He has an essay on agile architecture. It's actually been there for like 10 years or something, and you can summarize it in one single sentence. And he says this. He says that you need to base your architecture on your requirements. So make sure you know what you're doing at a high level. Because he's talking about agile architecture, he's talking about sufficiency of just enough of travelling light. So that's the second part of the sentence. And the third thing he says is this: prove your architecture with concrete experiments. And what he's really referring to here is just trying stuff out if you need to. Proof of concepts, prototypes, spikes, etc. All of this comes down to is one very, very simple word: risk. If you're running a software project, if you're leading a software project, you just need to manage your risk appropriately. And ideally, you need to find your highest priority risks. Now, there's a self-preservation thing here, right? If I'm leading a project, I don't want to get fired, and I don't want to get my project cancelled. That's it. More getting fired, to be fair. Because these things will cause your project to fail. And a lot of teams, they don't understand that. And all software projects have risks, don't they? And who normally looks after the risks of software projects? It's the project manager. Are project managers technical? Usually not. So we've got this non-technical person looking after technical risks. It doesn't work, it doesn't happen. What's a risk? A risk is an event that if it happens, something bad's also going to happen. And we can rank it on probability, so likelihood, versus impact, in other words, side effect. So there are a lot of ways to quantify risks, to rank risks, to prioritize risks, but we need to get to a list of risks first. And I guarantee you, if you ask the project managers to come up with a list of technical risks, they won't give it to you. If you ask a bunch of developers to give you a list of technical risks, it won't happen either, because it's boring. So there are some ways around this. I've got this technique I teach people called risk storming. This is described on my website and in my book. And basically, draw some pictures, get all the team in front of the picture, and just start identifying risks on little post-it notes and put them on the pictures. If you use different colour post-it notes to represent the different priorities of risk, then you've got an at-a-glance view of your technical risks. And then you can choose where to do your spikes. Really dead easy. Nice collaborative visual approach. The caveat is you need to be able to draw pictures to do this. And the whole thing about drawing pictures is about communicating the vision. And in order to be agile, in order to move fast, you need to be able to communicate well, and pictures are a fantastic way of doing this. But we don't draw pictures well anymore, so it takes a long time to explain these things. So just learn how to draw pictures. Is my other piece of advice. If you want to go learn UML, that's fine. It still has value. I use a very, very simple technique. Again, this is all documents on my website, but basically I have a very simple abstraction I use for documenting and understanding software systems. I say a software system is made up of containers. Containers are web server, app server, database, standalone application, etc. Anywhere that you can put code, data, and behavior. That's made up of components, and if you're using an OO language, those components are made up of classes. That's it. And then I just draw a diagram at each level in turn. Very, very simple diagrams. So the whole architecture thing, the whole role, how does it fit into projects? Remember I talked about the 2 conflicts before. We've got big upfront design, which we don't do anymore, and some teams are over here doing nothing. They're hoping for the best. They're trying to do evolutionary architecture, but in effect they're just hoping. And we've got this conflict between the role, a dedicated person versus self-organising teams. And for me, doing just enough architecture in the 21st century is about finding the sweet spot in the middle. It's about doing the important stuff. And for me, the important stuff is, understanding your significant structure, It's about identifying and mitigating the key risks, and it's about creating that shared vision for everybody to work with. That's it. That's software architecture in a nutshell. But it can be done by one or many people. But the first thing you should do is figure out where you are on the scale and make sure you get some leadership first, and then move upwards. So is this a silver bullet? Have I hit the sweet spot straight away? No. You know, Agile is solving a whole bunch of problems around transparency and delivering the right thing. The software craftsmanship movement is about delivering high quality code, being professional, etc. But you can still do those things and build systems that don't work, or have a team that's very chaotic. So, you know, I think this stuff I've talked about fills another piece of the jigsaw for many teams. My final piece of advice for you is to ignore speakers. Yes, I do understand what I've just said. When you go to conferences, when you read books, when you read blog entries, don't blindly adopt what people say. You know, this stuff works really well for me. It might work for you, it might not work for you. Before you adopt stuff, just think. Right, so you need to try it first and then do some thinking. But think before you try as well. Manage your risks indeed. So that's my final note, and I shall leave you with my closing line. Thank you very much, and see you later at the conference over.